This country is not that old. I was speaking in Marion, Ohio some years ago, the birthplace of Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding was a contemporary of Harry Truman, of Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt in 1920 was predicted that he would be renominated to be the candidate for president. He died in 1919, so they chose, on the 55th ballot, they chose Warren G. Harding. I'm speaking in his hometown to the Daughters of the American Revolution, and so I'm making an observation about, telling stories about Warren Harding, and everybody's nodding their head rather vigorously, and I thought, I gotta see how deep I'm getting in here. And so I said, how many of you people knew President Harding personally? 3/4 of the people in the room put their hand up. And the woman that had introduced me, her husband had sung at the funeral. So here is a contemporary of Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt watched Abraham Lincoln's funeral when he was a young boy in New York. Abraham Lincoln watched the founders of our nation die, and when he was in his 20s and his 30s. During his lifetime, most of them passed away. So in that brief period of time, this is a very, very young nation. And so the things that they've learned and knew, when they put it together, they put a couple of thoughts together that were different than everybody else, and they began with our birth certificate that said this: we hold these truths. And that means there's a right and a wrong. Not what you think is right, but what there is a truth. Now that's enough to get you denied tenure at almost any college, but nevertheless, they felt that there was truth. And we hold these truths to be self-evident, which is a gracious Jeffersonian way of saying, any idiot ought to understand this. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You're blind, deaf, and dumb. You ought to see this. That is, that all men are created equal and are endowed by the group that they belong to, and if the right to which group they belong to, and if they're in the proper union, and if they have the right sexual partners, and they get privileges. No. They're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life. Say, oh, I don't want the government involved in that. No. This is what government does. Before it does overpasses and sewer systems, it's got to preserve life. Life, then liberty. Notice the sequence. See, liberty is a precious little value if you're dead. You need liberty, you need life first. And if you don't have life, then liberty isn't of much value. And that's what government is supposed to do. It is supposed to protect innocent life, then liberty, then the right to pursue happiness. And therefore, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. This is what government does. Now, at the same time that we were establishing our Constitution, there was a battle going on in France. And France, it was the era of the Enlightenment. So they didn't have to rely upon God. Man can decide. And so in the French Revolution, they didn't need the same things that we needed. Their theme was that they wanted liberty, equality, and fraternity. What's the word for fraternity? Group. What's another word for group? Union. What's another word for union? Soviet. Because of the group that I belong to, I get equality. How do you get equality? We're going to tax, I heard a fellow call into Rush Limbaugh yesterday. He said, you hear these politicians talking about how they're so in favor of the American dream, preserving the American dream, but after 250,000, they want to kill everybody. They're all so bad. They only want an American dream to what they say. So the equality becomes a noble cause in their mind. Now, how do you get equality? You have to take from one group and give to another. Now, we just had a dinner last night in Austin, Texas, with a young fellow, graduate of Princeton, a fellow working for an investment banker, a fellow that ought to know better. And he's trying to explain to us that how this is such a noble. See, when you're in college, the idea of everybody having the same amount of income sounds noble. I repeat, you don't want to do it with your grades. If it's all fired great, why don't you try it? Why don't you work real hard and then get the same grade as the guy that doesn't show up and see how much fun that is? When you do that, then you can tell me why I ought to give my money away. But nevertheless, so the idea that when you do that, it doesn't work well, because let us suppose that a person here makes $100 and this person makes nothing. And it only takes $50 to live comfortably. And so the compassionate politician comes over and taps him on the shoulder and says, you vote for me. This guy's got twice as much money as he needs. You vote for me, I'll take $50 from him and give $50 to you. Now, when you rob from Peter to give to Paul, you can always count on the political support of Paul. So, but what happens when you do that? It works great for the first week. And then Peter says, now let me get this straight. I get up every morning, I leave my family, I go away, I work hard, I'm tired, I come home, I get $50. This guy sits over, he plays video games all day, sits on the park bench, he gets $50. I think I like his program better. And so then, because you took away the incentive and the reward, the entire place becomes poorer. When the communists took over in Chile, they said immediately that everybody was going to have the same salary regardless of what their conditions were, how much they worked, or if they were the head of the factory, or if they were the lowest, they were going to get a living wage. Everybody voted for that. They thought it was wonderful. Production in the first month fell 70% to 30% of what it was the month before. If you do this, you can make any rich place poor. So these folks are very good at it. So they don't want to have equality. When you take from one person to give to another, what happens? The people object. What happens when they object? You got to kill them. So the symbol of the French Revolution was the guillotine. Not in the American Revolution, but was the French Revolution, was the symbol was the guillotine. You got to take their life. So when Pol Pot took over in Cambodia, anybody who wore glasses, anybody who could read, anybody who owned an automobile, he killed them all. When Castro took over, I sat beside a guy on the airplane yesterday, he had a picture of Che Guevara. Che Guevara was the mass murderer for Fidel Castro when he took over in Cuba, killed 400,000 people. And our daughter is now in Rwanda. In Rwanda, one tribe wanted to wipe out another tribe. In less than 90 days with machetes, they killed nearly 1 million, over 900,000 people. We lost 420,000 in World War II. This little country lost 1 million in less than 90 days. When Hitler took over, killed 12 million, 6 million Jews, 6 million Catholic priests and others. When we were in the Soviet Union, Liz and I would always ask our Soviet minders after a week to get a little relationship with them. I said, how many people do you think Stalin killed in the 1930s? The numbers that came back were always in the neighborhood of about 60 million people. Our history books say 35 million. No matter how you slice it, it's a potload of folks. You see, when you have God, God protects life. And when you do away with God, sin is anything that separates us from God. So when you willfully separate yourself from God, sin, when it is conceived, bringeth forth death. The wages of sin is death. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. And so when a person wants to separate themselves from God, then they're at the mercy of a politician's group, and they always end up killing. Our Bible says that I am come that you might have life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He that hath the Son hath life. And so our founders deliberately tied ourselves to that principle. And that's why there's such a tremendous desire to cut us away from our relationship with God. That's why they want to take God out of the pledge, to take the Ten Commandments off of our monuments, to erase Judeo-Christian symbols off the city seals, to stop prayer in school and ban and graduations, and the Boy Scouts not allowed to use facilities, or the Salvation Army. They want to separate us from God, and when they separate us from God, there is no protection then for life, and then we become just like every other nation. Now, who's going to decide how that happens? You and I simply will. The revolution, they thought that they could have peace through posterity. When our founders got together at the same place they'd written the Declaration of Independence some 12 years before, they had 13 individual countries, 13 individual currencies, 13 individual foreign policies, and they said we need to form a nation. And so George Washington and Alexander Hamilton called them together in the same place where they'd written the Declaration of Independence some 12 years before. They met there for 5.5 weeks and could agree upon absolutely nothing. 50% of the people lived in 3 states, 50% of the people lived in 10 states. There's no way around that. Little states weren't going to be dictated by the big ones, and vice versa. 4 states said that they wanted to preserve slavery because without that they couldn't sell it back home, and so the question was not whether or not there would be slavery. The question was whether or not there would be a United States of America. The people said, no, this country is not going to be like other countries where you had slaves and you had citizens. We want everybody to be a citizen. In 1787, during this time, half of the population of Philadelphia had at some time been a servant or had been a slave, had been an indentured servant, even including Benjamin Franklin. And what they said, when we form this new country, we want to have no slavery, we want to have citizenship for everyone. And they argued about it, and nobody could agree upon it. And finally, after these several weeks, a fellow by the name of Benjamin Franklin, he was one of the 12 people attending that had signed the Declaration of Independence. He was 80-some years old. He had negotiated the peace treaty in 1783 in Paris. He had given our nation its independence, been governor of Pennsylvania and other skills. But now he was in his 80s, had gout, and had not spoken at all, and began to ask to be heard for the very first time. And he said very simply this: He said, Mr. President, the small progress that we have made after 4 or 5 weeks is proof of the imperfection of human understanding. We have gone back to ancient history for models of government and examined the different forms which now no longer exist. We have viewed modern states all around Europe, but find none of their constitutions suitable for our circumstances. Let us pause. Wisdom is the proper use of knowledge. Knowledge is good, but you need wisdom, the proper use of knowledge. You can teach a 10-year-old how to drive. You don't throw your keys to a 10-year-old. Why? Because he lacks wisdom, the proper use of knowledge. Wisdom comes from only 2 sources. One is experience, your own or someone else's. A wise person reads and learns from the experiences of others. But there's some things we've never experienced before. You've never gone through the 11th year of a marriage with an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. Some things you've never done before. And so the Scripture says, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not, or doesn't scold us for asking. And so what he said is, we've gone through the experiences. We've gone through the experiences of everybody else, and we find it nothing suitable for our circumstances in this situation, groping in the dark to find political truth. We have not once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding. For 5 weeks, we've been crawling around here in the dark, and nobody has bothered to go over and turn on the lights. In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Our prayers were heard, and they were graciously answered. And have we now forgotten this valuable friend? Now, it's only been 12 years, not 200 years. It's only been 12 years. He said, have we now forgotten this powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we're French and we no longer need his assistance? Sir, I have lived a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth that God governs in the affairs of men. If a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Well, I firmly believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. I therefore move that prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. And so with that, they recessed. They went across the street to Reverend Rogers' church for 3 days of fasting and prayer and met the following Monday. And over the next 5 weeks, they wrote the Constitution of the United States of America, establishing the oldest government on the planet. Every government on earth has changed since that time. It's been available as a template and still is, in my opinion, the apex of human government. And they said that since we understand how this works now, let us make sure that we do not forget that. Therefore, this Congress shall never meet for 1 minute without first calling upon God in prayer. And if the Congress meets tomorrow for 5 minutes to take a message from the Senate, the Speaker will come in and bang the gavel. They will ask God's blessing. They'll accept the message, bang the gavel, and adjourn. Congress has never met from that day until this without acknowledging that we call upon God in prayer. And said then in all of our official documents, I don't care if you're doing dairy price supports or whatever it is, but at the end, you need to remember that done in the final sentence, in this, the year of our Lord, the 2008th, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 232nd. And then we're going to say that any person who holds a position of public trust, I don't care if it's dog catcher or president of the United States, must first swear allegiance to God on the Bible. And then in the Civil War, the President Lincoln said, lest you think you're successful because of your financial success, let us put right on the money right there that in God is our trust, and that shall be our motto. To acknowledge that we are different from other places, and that has made us to be blessed of all places, so that if a Jew can be chased from around the world, they can come to this country and be protected because of a respect for God, an honoring of human life, and therefore safe and liberty. This nation has now been the lighthouse for the rest of the world. Concluding thought would simply be this. That is that Russell Kirk said politicians are actors performing a script that is written by the audience. I'm going to say it again. Politicians are actors performing a script written by the audience. The audience decides who directs our country. You know who understands that? Hollywood understands that. They like to feed things to the people that we put in office will represent our values. That's why it's essential for you to be involved, to provide leadership and direction, and thereby continue to hold out the light of hope for liberty, for freedom, for life and prosperity called the United States of America. God bless.